got a lot of presence here on this program, and it's going to be interesting to talk about where all that stands now. And welcome very, very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome two gentlemen that are involved, like myself, in alternate media. And on my far left is Joshua Volinski, who's a producer here. He has the Josh Volinski Show, and he helps enormously in terms of the cooperative production, technically and so forth, which is a hallmark of public access. He's a great help. He's learning like really fast how to make all the equipment work. He's getting to be a whiz with the equipment in a very relatively short time, and he's producing. He's here all the time. And Josh, welcome very, very much to Conversation.
I'm really honored to be here, and those that are watching, I hope you come down here and let me work with you, and you'll work with me, and we'll get things done.
Yeah, I think access is quite amazing. Yeah. Really amazing. I want to talk some about that in terms, I've been thinking about it just recently, how amazing it is in terms of the national communications and, in fact, the national economy. I think it has implications. But I'm going to talk about that. And George, he likes to call himself Ugly George. I don't see why, but he wants to call himself Ugly George as a noomed film or noomed theater or something, and that. But he's well known to everyone because he's been around in alternate media circles since the beginning of time, I believe.
You know why? You know why I call myself Ugly George?
No, tell us. Why do you call yourself Ugly?
Because sitting next to Josh, every Goyle that walks in here will say, Josh, the handsome guy, and George, the ugly guy. They'll go for him right away.
Yeah, you got to have something to compare it to in order to set the standard.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to get to you, George, in a second, and you're well known and everything. But Josh, share a little bit, because you're also down to WBAI, another alternate media center, and you're a networker par excellence between people within the, let's say, roughly the progressive movement over a long period of time. You've had a long association with the City University. And so share your background a little bit, including WBAI, because we're going to want to talk about media for the people, media alternative to the major network orientation of most of our media, that sort of thing. But share your own background, particularly as it relates to media, if you could.
Yeah, well, of course, I've been working with WBAI one way or the other as a volunteer since 1966.
Wow.
The first producer I met at WBAI was Ayn Rand.
Really?
And luckily, I was accompanied by somebody who spoke Russian. That was Ayn's language and so on. And she was so fluent in Russian, I'm speaking of my mother, that Ayn Rand looked at me and said, oh, a big guy like you must be good for something. Now, this was before computers, 1966.
Yeah.
So Ayn said, would you please put the stamps on my envelopes? I have to mail them out. So I helped her, my first volunteer work.
Been helping
of course, she
since.
wrote Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead.
Yeah.
And she was a reactionary, you know. Politically, she was a reactionary. And in fact, the day we came in, she was doing a commentary against the public sector, not MNN or Channel 13, but TVA, Tennessee Valley Association, saying that it should be taken over by the government, you know, that it's highly inefficient. Now, it wasn't highly inefficient. It was just highly inefficient for making large profits, like Con Edison.
Imagine
if Con Ed was nationalized and we had free electricity. I mean, that's what TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, was about, and so on. And then I've been with BAI all these years, and it was recently, after spending 50 years at City College in the capacity in the institutional and then the privatized bookstore, that I said, at BAI, we've got to do a program about the trials and tribulations and problems at the City University of New York. So I formed this CUNY collective, professors, staff members, and students. And we do a program every month
across all class lines.
City University of New York. At City College, I also worked in the Messenger. Now that's the independent newspaper, student newspaper of City College. Extremely, here's my story of the 1951 basketball scandals at CCNY. I became an expert on that. You know, how these young men used to fix the games. This was our centerfold before the... Now, the administration refused to fund this paper. So we did what WBAI does. We went to the faculty, we went to the students, and we raised our own money, and we continued to publish this paper on the campus. And so on.
Congratulations on your entrepreneurial spirit. That's really good. Back to 66, did you say?
Yeah.
Boy, that goes way back into the... There was no cable television to speak of or anything of that. It was a whole other era. And that's an era that we were born into and we're growing out of and everything like that, being older.
There wasn't any public television. Of course, since one of my mentors is Eric Barnow, the archivist of films at the Library of Congress, and the first man who released tapes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, what really happened there when those bombs dropped, Eric Barnow. And in his book, Media Lost and Found, he discusses, lo and behold, public access and how important it is to the people. And of course he mentions he's a little upset with some of the trivialities on public access once in a while, but he says that is part of the entire picture and substance of public access. It's got to be a voice of the voiceless, and it's got to be a voice of people who want to express themselves. And in this book, Media Lost and Found by Eric Barnow, he goes into the importance of public access, and also hopes and knows that it's going to expand and it's going to flourish and improve all the time. And he is really a great inspiration. He also did a wonderful book, documentary, for you filmmakers, Eric Barnow, which gives the entire history and progression of documentaries throughout the world, not only here in the United States. And I love the section where he discusses our friend, the man that...
Handsome George.
Yeah, that ugly George calls up every day, John Alpert. There's a full section on John Alpert here, how he met his wife during Vietnam demonstrations, and then he was fired from ABC and NBC for being a Pacifica-style reporter on corporate media.
Mention who Pacifica is, George. I mean, Josh.
What?
Pacifica. They won't know that. Pacifica Network.
Oh, Pacifica.
Yeah, spell that out just a little bit.
Yeah. I should really also discuss the Pacifica Network, because I am a unpaid staff member of Pacifica. Pacifica has 5 stations in the United States, one in Washington, D.C., one in Texas, 2 in California, and 1 in New York, WBAI 99.5. And
Radio.
Originally, as I say, it had a full spectrum of political opinions and commentaries, like Ayn Rand, William Buckley. But as time went on, we have moved we live in a draconian era, very reactionary era. And despite all this propaganda that there's a liberal media, that is total hogwash.
Hogwash.
There is no liberal media. There is a corporate media. And even when you have something very unusual on the op-ed page of the New York Times, if you look throughout the Times, you see that it is a complete front for real estate banking, and they want to sell you a $5 million condominium and a $50 million estate. And it's amazing that they have the outrage to charge you for the New York Times, because the Village Voice can give itself away with a lot of advertisers, but the New York Times has the richest advertisers on the planet Earth, and meanwhile it has the audacity of taking $1.50 from you every day and $3.50 on a weekend.
Okay, well that's good. That's really good. Thanks. That's a lot of information packed in there. But let's get George have his thing to say. Now, how about your time in the media or alternate media or any media? Talk a little bit about the
briefly,
same kind of...
trying not to be too conceited. I'm trying to be as nice as Donald Trump, who is not conceited. Okay. Everything Ugly George does, besides being the biggest show in the history of cable TV, now shows up on the internet in a very big way. Okay?
We want to come in tight focus on that, because that's why interest to this institution.
Yeah, right? That's why I have 350 videos currently on YouTube, and they're being translated into 5 languages around the world. Spanish, French, Russian, Turkish, and soon into Polish, okay? So everything I do picks up, including shows that we do right in this studio, the latest one with Dan Coughlin, the executive director.
You don't have that one up here with Dan, right?
That'll be up in a second, okay? Boob Tube is the trailer for my movie. But notice the links are being translated around the world. Now, this has been a long and very bitter fight, and it's not over yet, as Harold Channer would say. I am the history of public access, very briefly. Around 1974, Manhattan Cable, Time Warner, was taken over, and Time Warner found that it had an empty victory. It had won the public access franchise for the island of Manhattan, southern Manhattan, theoretically, as Harold would say, the richest franchise in the country. But it won nothing. It had only sold 80,000 subscriptions, which is ridiculous in a place like Manhattan, simply because no one wanted to buy public access, no one wanted to buy cable TV. In fact, its enemies referred to it as pay TV. So it was mostly a redistribution to get a clearer signal of regular broadcast television.
Yeah, as it had been out in the boondocks of Pennsylvania and so forth.
This is why Mr. Kahn had invented cable TV.
That'd be Irving Kahn.
Yeah, because Mr. Irving Kahn was in a little town in Pennsylvania which was blocked on 3 sides by mountains, and the people in the village down below simply could not get television. So he invented a zany idea: put antennas up on the hills and literally run a wire down to the people's homes. However, since the wire had to carry a lot of signals, it had to be much bigger than a twisted pair 300-ohm coax, so it became a cable, literally a cable full of wires, and thus it was known as cable TV. So at first, cable was simply a retransmission to get a clearer signal of broadcast television. But some people began to pressure in the late 60s and early 70s for something called public access. And what that meant was that since the company winning this lucrative franchise in each town would have the right to wire up the town and take money from the people, it would then have to provide at least one channel where the citizens of the town could put on programs. Okay, this seemed harmless enough. It seemed harmless, because they didn't reckon with Josh Volinski and Harold Channer. Now, had they known that these 2 deviant devils were to come up with other things, they would have thought a little more seriously about public access. These men are dangerous, and I want everyone to know that.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, when they did write in public access requirements, which was not everywhere, but in about half the systems, it specifically stated in every single one, the governing authority, the franchise authority, that is the town granting the franchise, shall have the right and duty to censor public access shows before they go on the air. There is to be no free expression. There's to be no free public access. There's to be no free expression of ideas. The town itself must appoint a committee and delegate a committee with full governmental authority, full police authority, to preview every single public access show and determine whether it meets community standards. Now this, of course, is a way of killing public access content. And the word comes up bland. The other word comes up safe. So shows were allowed on public access in half of the United States, but they were bland shows and safe shows. They never would have allowed a Harold Channer. Now, Harold Channer never bared a breast on television, but he says things. And sometimes these things are not always in accordance with what the town fathers would like. So Harold is dangerous. Josh does the same thing. Therefore, there was to be no freedom of speech, no First Amendment. So nothing could go on that was not safe.
Did I say something, or you want to go more? Or?
First.
Yeah, because I don't know. You said 76 or 74.
No. Late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, but you were talking about yourself.
But Manhattan Cable, Time Warner came to Manhattan Cable. This is considered the birth of cable in 1974.
I'm not sure, but this public access is something I really believe in, although I really am amazed recently by thinking it through and so forth in a large context. And I'm not sure how it exists in terms of such a unique situation. But I was at a university, and they tell me, I don't know, I'd have to check it out and make sure, but I think this program we're part of now, is the longest running program in public access in the country. So
probably is, no?
And we were taping programs around 69. And I got the use of what I think was, that's where an individual could make a program. And I think we got having been in touch with Paul Ryan and Marcia, he was in touch with Marcia McLuhan and some academics and so forth. I got the use of, I think, about the fourth or fifth, what they called then Porta-Pack, that came off the boat from Japan. All the technology was coming from Japan. And so we were producing programs up in the town of New Paltz.
Okay,
and there was a town of New Paltz there, and that was before they had it in the city. But when you look at it, but we were producing programs, and it was small. So some people said, well, they had a head end where you connect all the cables down to the people and take it off the satellite delivered or the long distance, and they would take it down, like you say, to boost the signal from New York. And then they said, well, you got a channel capacity there. You could do it maybe. And they had a camera. They actually had a little camera up there.
Okay.
And it was playing out in the meadow with rabbits.
Okay, let me jump.
They said, why don't you, let me just go for a minute.
Yeah.
So then they said, why don't you just go up there and you could put something on in terms of New Paltz. That was before they had it in New York.
Okay.
So we did do that in the town. It was small and everybody knew one another, and they did. And I'll be darned, we put it on. We used to get some really good people. Jonas Mekas and all kinds of people particularly would come up there, go up on top of the mountain, sit in this little room. It was just like a kind of like a privy. I mean, just a small room, and put on programming. And then they came. And finally it came because the cable was coming, and they had that Sloan Commission report. Do you remember that? That was 1970.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't remember it being quite so constrained as you seem to say, that there's no chance for anything to get past community standards because it was being worked out.
Let me answer that. It's very important you understand
this.
If
I may, just one thing. 1970 is a definitive year in the communication history of this country.
Not really, but
in my view.
Let me explain to you, okay? New Paltz was sui generis. It was one of its kind, okay?
No.
Try to understand that in the early days, roughly before 1974, more than 50% of the cable franchises in the United States had no public access by law.
Yeah,
no public access. It was not allowed.
Wasn't any.
Right.
Let me talk with you.
Please, it was not allowed.
What was not allowed? It wasn't technologically possible. And let me. There's a guy. Did you meet Chester Berger ever?
Please, let me make the point, okay?
Well, you're trying to make a point that
there was no...
It's not totally valid, the point you're making, so we'll come back to it. Okay.
There was no public access asked for or allowed in 50% of the cable franchises.
Well, you're jumping ahead.
Of the other 50% of the cable franchises by 1974, there was only one kind of public access, which was the town set up its own censorship committee and pre-screened every videotape that went on the air. pre-screened every videotape.
Okay.
Now, what Harold is talking about is the one or two exceptions that prove the rule. New Paltz may have been one of them. Okay?
We didn't
but
screen anything. We didn't.
These were the
anything.
exceptions that proved the rule.
Well, but the exceptions are what
Harold,
matter.
please. In every other franchise, perhaps, if you like a number, 2,500 franchises, it was written into the law that the cable system shall determine, the government of the town shall determine the content of the show and whether it is appropriate for airing in that town.
Okay.
To give you a very small example.
You're making a point that runs counter to the point I want to make, so I'll get to that at some point.
Now, to give you a point that's not very far away from here, there is a corrupt little town called Union City, New Jersey, which is 1 mile away across the Hudson from where we're sitting. A certain female put on a certain show, or tried to put on a certain public access show in the 1980s, not the 70s, but the 80s. It was what Josh Volinski would call a pornographic show. She had no trouble airing the show on Manhattan cable. It was, in fact, one of the most popular shows. Right in the middle of the airing of the show, the mayor called the cable system, and he said, take that show off immediately. This second, take it off right now. He then instructed his police chief to inform the woman who lived in New York, if you ever come to Union City to pick up that tape, we will have you arrested. This is public access.
No, it is not. That is one view of it, and I mean, I want to make a point while you're rattling on.
This is public access in 49% of the United States, where the town council, the mayor, or their appointees determine what goes on the air and what doesn't go on the air. It's also pre-screened. This is public access.
Okay.
In most of the United States.
Full stop? Full
Please,
stop?
no.
Full stop. You got to go on?
Now, in the late 1960s, New York City began to delve into the idea of public access. New York City had a very progressive mayor. His name was John Lindsay. And John Lindsay saw a bright light in cable TV. Not for the people of New York, not for Harold Channer, not for Josh Volinski. He saw a bright light on cable TV for President John Lindsay, President of the United States. And he said, not only can this be a very important conduit for me to get into the White House, but it will look great that I, the great progressive John Lindsay, progressive was an exciting word, have the most forward-looking, the most important cable TV in the United States. And of course, that's me. Therefore, I should be President of the United States. So he had written into the franchise, nothing to do with any Sloan Commission or Sidney Dean, for the sole benefit of the mayor of the city of New York.
Not the first time that's happened in the history of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Channer.
I understand all that.
Thank you. So Mayor John Lindsay, the wannabe President John Lindsay of the United States, had a clause written into the franchise. The only one in the United States, I stress the only one, that said the cable system, whoever wins the cable franchise in Manhattan Island, which was the only cable, cannot interfere with the content of public access TV. Cannot interfere with it. There is to be no pre-screening. There is to be no pre-censorship.
Okay.
This is one out of 2,500 cable systems in the U.S.
Full stop?
Yes.
Okay, full stop. That's good. Let's go back to the if we can. You keep going to 74 or something.
Because that's when Time Warner took it over.
Full stop, you said. Full stop?
Yeah, let's go.
Full stop.
Okay.
Shut up. Please. So why don't we go back to 1970? You seem not to, and you seem to overlook the Sloan Commission report. And the Sloan Commission report was taken by people who were very interested in a very comprehensive way, and it's never perfect. Things change in a slow pace very often, but it had to do with technological developments that were being studied intellectually. No, don't interrupt. By a lot of people who were studying that both politically, economically, technologically, intellectually, and it was and they studied it, and they said, here comes cable television, and realized we had only had, and that's why I wanted to mention this fellow Chester Berger. I'd like to introduce you to him sometime. George, you know what he was? He was the first person at CBS. He wandered in, he was out of Brooklyn. He's up in his 80s now, a senior citizen.
Yeah.
But he was the first guy there, and they had the radio network and everything. John Cameron, Swayze, do you remember that, Josh? John Cameron,
yes,
Swayze,
yes.
the radio.
He was one of my favorites.
Yeah, and we were coming out of the radio era and everything, and Mr. Chester Bird was a young man there, and he was the first guy ever to stand with a microphone. He stood in a microphone, and they put a camera on him, and there were no video cameras. It was 1946.
Okay.
And he was the first person ever. This is interesting in terms of McLuhan terms, like.
Yeah.
And he was the first person ever to be a television newscaster. And you know what they called those people? You know, they had the name for the first newscaster. He was the first person ever on the planet to stand and make a news report.
All right.
You know what they called them?
Newsreaders.
No, they didn't. It was really, they called it, they had a title for them. They were visualizers.
Okay.
So they're going to go, and they're coming out of radio, right? And they're coming and they're saying, now look, this is a map of something, and you got to visualize it, because nobody wanted to have anything to do with television. I'm making a point.
See,
and
both
nobody
of you,
wanted to have anything to do with television.
Both of you are coming from different directions.
Yeah, I'm coming from
what George
is
saying is not untrue, but he's very much like the so-called wise men in India that were examining an elephant, and one wise man would say, oh, the elephant is very rough, and another one would perhaps do what George is doing, feeling his horns and saying he's horny. But the elephant is a complete personality. It's very different.
Please.
And Harold, you're giving a broader
so, and that's the point. But,
to use Harold's expression, full stop.
No, not full stop yet.
Please.
Not full stop.
Please, full stop.
Not full stop. I'm coming back. So I'm looking at it just to get a sense of the evolution of technology and the evolution of capability, and the Sloan Commission addressed that. That's 1970. In 1970, and they said cable television, the medium of abundance. So there were people who were always into trying to censor and to let things out. A lot of people are worried about public morals, all those kind of things. That's all part of the equation. But things were developing. I think the year to go to is 1970, and that's when the real competition was on for cable franchise for the Manhattan market as it was going on around the country. That's all.
Okay.
Base it 1970.
Full stop.
And bring in some of the
full
intellectuals.
Stop.
Okay.
1970 is absolutely true. Everything that Harold Chanter says is absolutely true.
Wow.
It's also totally irrelevant.
I don't think so.
Please, full stop. From 1970 to 1974, Time Warner did not own the Manhattan Cable franchise.
Sterling.
Somebody else did. It was a total failure. It was a total failure in every sense.
So was early television.
It was a total failure.
But everybody knew it was a license to print money.
I thought we said full stop.
Yeah.
It was a license to lose money.
No, it was a license to print money.
It was a license to lose money.
Everybody knew it was a license to print money, George.
It was a license to lose money.
Lord Beaverbrook said it.
First Sterling Manhattan, and then a certain person whose name is Dolan, lost hundreds of millions of dollars on the Manhattan Cable franchise. The simplest reason was no one cared to sign up. Okay? The money only came from one source, subscribers. There were very few subscribers. No one cared to sign for cable TV. The Sloan Commission was irrelevant. Sidney Dean was irrelevant. Even John Lindsay was irrelevant. And John Lindsay, for many, many reasons beyond the scope of this show, went downhill very quickly by the time of his second election, his re-election. He never was president of the United States, and he faded very quickly from view. So everything that Harold is talking about is a total failure. In 1974, a switch was made, and Chuck Dolan bowed out of the money-losing Manhattan Cable franchise, still theoretically known as Sterling Cable Manhattan TV, bowed out of it. Why did he get out of it? Because it was a loser. It was a failure. It was going nowhere.
That's a wrong picture.
He was bleeding money tremendously.
It's always like
now, a company called Time Warner had a little tiny franchise on Long Island. It was never going to amount to anything, they thought, and so a swap was arranged. By the way, more or less illegally. And with the wink from the New York City Council, otherwise known as the Franchising Authority, they simply swapped franchises without a vote of the entire City Council.
Full stop? Yeah, full stop. Let me say a couple of things. Cable television, 85% of the country now gets their service of television via cable. Everybody could see that coming that had the wit to see it. They knew it was a license to print money, that it was a growth thing. When they start a new business, there's always a degree of risk, and things have a hard time getting started. Mr. Lindbergh hardly got off the ground when he sailed to France. Those kind of things you're saying are details of a certain situation within a certain context, and it didn't have anything to do. Everyone knew that cable was a coming thing, and people wanted it, and it was, as Lord Beaverbrook said, a license to print money. It was going to make money, and they make great deals of money, and they distribute. They're very successful now.
All right,
somewhere between the total failure and now, there's something has happened.
Now, can we return? The non-historian Harold Channer has lost the story in 1974 and brought it up to today, which is completely different.
Just making a point.
Now, in 1974, there was the framework in place. Public access existed in New York.
From 70.
Public access had existed in New York, but it had bled money badly.
Well,
Time Warner then took over the franchise in 74. It continued to bleed money. It was losing $2 million a month on its Manhattan cable franchise.
Details in the history of the sweep of the industry.
A little detail.
Little details. And
I thought we had the floor here.
Okay.
Now, Time Warner, as rich as it is, could not afford to lose $2 million a month. Okay, so it did some clever things with home box office. It also allowed more public access. This did not change anything. By 1974, when a certain Ugly George came to cable TV, Time Warner was still hemorrhaging money, in spite of public access, and in spite of something else that Josh loves, pornography. Some wits had discovered somewhere in the John Lindsay law that since cable TV was not to be censored, the only place in the United States that they could get away with nudity. And they did what Harold Channer refers to as bad nudity. And it was very bad nudity, but it was nudity. You know what? It didn't work. Manhattan Cable still did not sell a lot of boxes, even with the alternative of nudity. It still didn't work. They still had only 80,000 boxes, an insulting 80,000 boxes by the end of 1976. It was still hemorrhaging $2 million a month. Okay? Then Ugly George came to cable.
Okay.
I was already very famous on broadcast TV during what they call sweeps for picking up beautiful girls and getting them to pose nude. So it was already known. The night that I premiered on cable in September 76, an amazing thing happened that had never happened before. Two TV stations, WNBC TV and WNEW Channel 5, both did stories on me and said, for the first time, this is very amazing for them, that there's a thing called cable TV. I'm sure you subscribers have never heard of it, but there's a thing called cable. And there's this filthy, disgusting guy named Ugly George, and he's going to put a pornographic show on, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do that, and it's going to be on Channel J, okay? Instantly, the phone lines lit up at Manhattan Cable. Instantly, all over the city, as soon as these newscasts aired. And everybody said, Channel J? I've been tuning my television, and I only see 213, only numbers. There's no Channel J on my television. How come I can't get this new thing called cable TV? The other people, not understanding that it was only Manhattan, also said, hey, I live in Manhattan. My neighbor down the hall says he has cable TV, but I don't see this Ugly George. How soon can I get it? Because Josh Volinski is knocking on my door, and he wants to watch cable. Now, I don't want to watch this dirty show because I'm clean and distinguished, but this guy Josh is annoying me, so I got to get it because of Josh. This man's name was used thousands of times.
May I say something, George?
Yes.
They should build a statue of you in Union Square and say, give me your poor, your rich, your bare bosoms right on the mantle.
Thank you.
So on.
And that's the
now
point
we know
you're trying
that
to make.
if we go on, if we go on in Times Square today, I think almost everyone has heard of Ugly George, but it's not to their credit that they don't know who Buckminster Fuller is.
Yeah, well, that's another.
They don't know who Mr. Watts is. They don't know the history of our country. They don't even know the 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution and so on.
That's another,
so the purpose of a facility like this is not only to give a voice to the voiceless, but to discuss the things that people don't know and have to learn about, and also to give a voice to people who are on Pacifica and down here. I mean, my God, I mean, there's a program on WBAI called Your Healthy Home. How many newspaper articles do you see about maintaining a healthy home with an area with clean air, clean food, non-toxins around?
Right.
And we have so many wonderful shows here, shows on animal rights.
That's right.
So
That's right. And I'm ready. And let me say, it's my turn. You were talking a long time, and I'm ready to give you credit, George. I think you're absolutely right, because they were saying, because I'm coming from a different thing. I was before you in terms of that, and I'm talking about things, you know, intellectual, and we can have new channels. And remember, they said medium of abundance. We can have alternate channels and the limitation of what we've been able to have. So I was really thinking what we could have is, and they developed the Open University in England. They began the Telstar, 64 or 74. They could link it up. It was happening. So we could have a channel where we would present the intellectual leadership of the world. And I'm saying to a lot of people, boy, we can have a channel where we can present our best minds and so forth. But absolutely, I'm ready to give credit totally to you, because a lot of the people don't care about that. And what they did want to see are naked ladies. And you were doing that in a very artful and skillful way. I think the Time Warner people ought to send you a great big check for having tapped into that interest, prurient or otherwise, that caused people to subscribe to cable. And it seems to be the point you're trying to make.
Okay,
and that's
wait,
good. And
please, time out.
Okay,
the only reason that Harold is here and Josh is here is the next step, if you allow me to get to it. Because none of you would be here, MNN wouldn't be here, because of some deviltry. And I have to get into this.
Oh, you want to make this...
There were devils who wanted to stop public access. They wanted to stop a lot of things. They wanted to stop everything that Harold just mentioned. The Free University of the Air, the Great Minds of the Air, the alternative channels. That was to be stopped. That was to be strangled in its crib.
No, whatever.
Strangled in its infancy. There was to be no such thing.
If there's no money to be made in it.
Please.
That's the meeting.
Please.
Yeah.
And the answer was just given in this very studio only a couple of weeks ago by Professor Dan Coughlin. And Dan Coughlin made an incredibly brilliant statement. And I'm not trying to praise him, but it was brilliant. Dan said what corporate media wants is 750 channels. Yes. All controlled by 2 corporations. They refer to this as diversity. So they didn't want the Free University of the Air. They didn't want Harold Channer. They didn't want Volinski. They wanted 350 channels from one corporation and 350 from another corporation, i.e. profitability. So they wanted a free expression of ideas among corporate types who could then make a lot of money off it.
Okay, stop. I've been doing it a lot. I did a lot. Henry Geller and Richard Wiley and the head of the, during this period of formation. Richard Wiley was the FCC chairman, and all these people involved. Ted Turner we did a program with. And I did another one, George, way the heck back around 74 when you were getting started. I remember going down entrepreneurially, if I may, younger. I had hair. And I would go to Washington. I was down there doing a program with a young man, and we did a program, taped it. And I said, we're having coffee over hands, warming our hands over a cup of coffee. And I said, I'm thinking we got all this Telstar, we got this capability. We can present the great minds, and we can present the leadership channel, the world leadership to which the people could repair in order to get a sense of what's going on comprehensively rather than all vested interest. And he said, Harold, that's a good idea. You think that's interesting because we got this capacity that's growing. We can put some really good stuff on. And he said, I'm thinking of starting something, right? And he said he was coming out of, I forget which outfit now.
Atlanta.
And he said, no, it wasn't then. It wasn't him. He said, I'm thinking of starting a program where we could use this channel capacity and the distribution capacity to the people from the cable television, which gave capacity for abundant capacity. And he said, I'm thinking of calling it, what do you think here? Well, I got an envelope. And he said, I'm thinking of calling, and he said, I'm thinking of calling, it's going to be cable, so it's going to be C. And then he said, and it's going to be delivered by the satellite, so it's going to be S, and he said it's going to be about public affairs. And it's going to be a network.
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN. That was Brian Lamb. He was thinking of starting. He pulled it off.
Okay.
And that was a great thing. And those are people within the industry. And a lot of the people, you go to the National Cable Television Association. Now, wait a minute.
All right.
Let me talk. There were a lot of people there. Brian Lamb loves the idea of public access. He's in cable. There are people within cable. The world is not all black and white. And there are people. Ted Turner likes cable, or the public access cable. They will look at it and they will say, how could they not like it in a sense? We got this capability, and here we're setting up a system that doesn't have to be depending upon money making. Oh, that's the thing that's really unique about it. That's the thing that's really unique about it. And you're setting up a system where the people are going to be able to compete on a playing field. There are people within the industry that think that way, although you can't depend on that.
Okay,
Let
Harold.
me finish. Let me finish.
Time out. You're wrong.
No.
You're totally wrong.
No.
Now,
okay,
what happened was very
keep
quickly.
It in mind, folks. We'll get back to the reality soon.
Very quickly, the corporate interests got up on their hind legs. Okay, very quickly. And they said, this public access is not only draining viewers from our money making, but it's dangerous because it's an alternative. Harold Chanter is an alternative, and we don't want any alternatives. We want our own way of doing it. But they were too clever to attack public access directly. They were too clever to say, we have to make a frontal assault on cable TV and public access, because that wouldn't have gone down well, especially not in liberal New York. So what did they do? And here I have to mention the garbage known as Catholics. They said to the Catholics of New York, which are easily 40% of the city, you Catholics are in trouble because we have kiddie porn, and porn in general, but especially kiddie porn. And so we are not opening a frontal assault against cable TV. We want to protect the sanctity of the Virgin Mary, the marriage, the children, the home, and the Catholic catechism. And in order to protect that, Cardinal Cook, we, the cable systems, have to move against pornography. Notice they didn't say we have to move against public access and Harold Chanter. They said we have to move against pornography. So the cable systems themselves tried to do an end run, a disguised end run. And what they did in early 1980, I believe this was, they got a corrupt piece of garbage from Syracuse, a state assemblyman named as Melvin Zimmer, who was not Catholic. Okay, he was Jewish.
Another detail, George.
A detail. Now, they went to, they went to Melvin Zimmer, and they said, Zimmer, will you sponsor a bill in the New York State Assembly to allow the cable systems, i.e. require the cable systems, to censor public access shows, and require the government to close this so-called John Lindsay loophole to censor cable TV shows on the island of Manhattan. And Zimmer, being corrupt, said, how much is in it for me? They gave him a figure. He said, fine, I'll censor the bill. So in the Assembly Codes Committee, in the New York State Committee, the first vote was 8-1 against me and against public access. 8-1, the New York State Assembly Codes Committee voted against public access. I believe this was June of 1981. Then I heard about it, thanks to some clever things. I was asked to go up to Albany and to meet with the Speaker of the State Assembly, whose name at the time was Stanley Fink. And I met the Speaker, and I gave him some very important ammunition. He then went to work. The New York Times went to work. Let subscribers censor cable smut. And what the Times said in its Voltaire-like way was, we don't agree with Ugly George. They practically called me a male chauvinist pig. And they said he does despicable things with women. But the proper answer for public access is for the subscribers to decide, not for the government to decide.
Okay,
and not for the cable system.
You made the point.
So,
break.
Please. So,
make the
point.
New
York Times and I and Speaker Fink killed the first bill that was successfully designed to get rid of public access, because the opening wedge was against pornography.
Stop. Okay, that's really good. That's good that you're saying that. And the point you're making, the point you're really focusing on is the First Amendment right of everybody to be able to see things, particularly things that might be called prurient by some or something, because you've been in that realm and you suffered because of that.
Not people,
Let me make
subscribers.
No, and
subscribers.
When you said they saved to public, they saved public access did not depend upon Ugly George. It wasn't only Ugly George that saved public access. There were a lot of other things going on in this world, believe it or not, George, other than Ugly George. You seem to have a fixation upon that. I can understand it's cool, and we want to give you a lot of money from Time Warner for having boosted their sales, and you've done it. I look at Home Box Office now, they've got it on there. That's a subscription system, and they've got outright the most outright sex you could ever want. They've got that. They got it through subscription. But the point being, apart from the thing about how they're going to censor you and then censor First Amendment issues and all that, which you stress so much, the thing is that the thing is growing. You now have a system called Manhattan Neighborhood Network. It exists here, and that exists, and it was growing across the country. It was coming out of the technological imperative. It's linked up with the computer developments that are going on now, and it has implications beyond people being able to see bare breasts or something.
No, and stop. Stop.
It's not being censored.
You're totally wrong. Okay? Now,
and even if it was, that's a small issue compared to the larger.
What I would like to
Please.
say,
look at the whole elephant,
Please.
George, not the tusk.
The second step, Stanley Fink told me, was to censor all public access, not just pornography. The second step was, believe it or not, the word libel. And since a public access show may possibly have libeled somebody,
well, anybody could.
Now the cable system,
the National News Council,
please,
they could do it at a network.
Was not only
all these issues are in the public
was now
domain.
Required, according to this bill, to also censor shows for the purpose of making sure the cable system was not subject to libel because of a public access.
The National News Council.
Okay.
Richard Salant was there.
Then they had a third category,
and
the third category was the insult to religions. And then there was a fourth category.
It goes on endlessly.
And a fifth,
we know that,
and a sixth.
George.
And
it's still going on. There's still those
we know
forces.
that these forces
but
are
it's a
powerful,
small issue.
and we know they're always fine.
All right.
Please.
Make the point. Make the point. What's the point?
Please.
What's
now,
the point?
This was Manhattan Island and New York State, okay? The issue was then taken up nationally in the United States Senate. And exactly the same kind of thing was proposed in the United States Senate. All cable access in the United States was now to be subject by a federal and state and local commissions as determined by local authority for public access for pornography, libel, against the church.
Yeah. That's
and
what
this,
Barnow says in here.
And this was, please,
there
was to be no public access, free public access in any of the United States, anywhere. ACAP wouldn't exist.
It is there now.
And it was proposed in the United States Senate by the unlamented James Exxon of Nebraska.
I did a program with him.
Okay, now James Exxon of Nebraska proposed the bill in the United States Senate, basically saying there is someone called Ugly George in New York.
And bring everything back to George.
And if Ugly George is allowed...
The universe goes around George.
If the Ugly George show is allowed on any other cable system in the United States, it will open the floodgates of obscenity, pornography, kiddie porn, people running naked in the streets. It will be chaos. The whole world will end. And so I, Senator Exxon from Nebraska, which has very little public access...
I got along fine with him. I did a program.
Senator Exxon then said...
abused him.
In other words, to stop public access, to stop Harold Channer, to stop Josh Volinski, to stop the upcoming 9/11 movement, which is taking place 20 years in the future, to stop all of that, I must propose a bill in the United States Senate to ban public access in the United States.
I helped disabuse him of that.
And make every governmental authority, both federal, state, and local, required, not asked, but required to pre-censor every show that goes on the
There
air.
are always these forces in society that are going to
this
censor
is the
in the
United
name of
States
political
Senate.
or economic interests and so forth. It's got a lot to do with politics. It's an old story, George, and it's still going. And you notice public access is still there, and
let
it's
me
stronger
say something
than ever,
and
it's
it's
growing, and you keep going back to this thing and sort of...
We dropped the bomb. We dropped a nuclear bomb
on
Hiroshima and Nagasaki
Who's we?
in
The United States
1945.
of America.
No,
the United States of American government.
No.
The United States government.
Josh,
Hush, let him talk. Let him talk, George.
Mr.
George, let him talk.
Who signed
Don't
the order?
worry about the details,
Well, that's
George.
not important.
It's not important
because
who
you
signed
see,
the order.
in your case,
Let him make the case.
in your case, a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, that's always
in your
the case. Yeah.
We dropped the bomb
fixated.
on Hiroshima in 1945. It wasn't until 1973 that Eric Bernau could release those tapes and show them on the screen and so on. So we know
censorship,
that reactionary forces are always there. But the bottom line here at Public Access and Pacifica and Downtown Community Television Center is to prevail. And we are prevailing. We are determined to prevail. And more important of all, it isn't on... The responsibility isn't on the shoulders of one or two people, because we involve everybody. You come down here, you see, we have 2,000 producers down
2,000,
here. We have facilitators.
It's called democracy. It's a dangerous
We have a
thing.
staff. We have professional technicians rewiring the place right now at this minute.
Catching up to the curve.
We all shoulder the responsibility for this facility and its principles to prevail.
And the principles come back to 1970, and they're established. You're always fighting lunatic fringe elements and for special interest things and all kinds of political, economic issues and all kinds of things and all that. It's always been there and it's still there. But public access does now exist. It continues to exist. It started about 1970, and the thing that's really unique about it is coming out of influences. You downplay Mr. Dean. He was a great force and everything, and there were some others. There were some people other than...
You keep repeating that nonsense.
No,
it was
not
John Lindsay.
Okay, I understand.
Sidney Dean was never elected to anything. He had no power to get anything passed.
No, wait a minute, George. You're looking at things very, in a certain way, if I may. Sidney Dean was part of what is called, and has not been relevant throughout the history of the country, he was something other than either private sector, he was in the private sector, or public sector, government. They call it government. Those are the two things in which the dialectic of the whole evolution of the society is evolving. There was something new emerging. Hadn't had influence.
Who signed the franchise agreement?
George, shut up.
Who signed the franchise agreement?
Shut up.
The government of the city of New York.
Yes, I understand.
Okay, was Sidney Dean part of that government?
No, he was.
Is his signature on it? No.
You want to stop talking?
It was signed by Mayor John Lindsay.
Okay, of course. And it still is, and the franchise in New York City is being negotiated by DeWitt. Mr. Cosgrove, he's going to be negotiating in the mayor's office. Understand, that's still there. But there was a merging in terms of the societal organization as we came into a medium of abundance, they said, and that the world was changing, and the civil. He was part of the City Club, well connected with the political and his town fathers of the time, also with people in the private sector, and he would be saying that he got along. He was a gentleman. He could get along, and he had an influence. He was saying public access channels, public access channels. We now have PEG channels, P-E-G. The educational and the government are understood in the historical development of the society. What was new with the public. This facility is here not for the government, through the government agency or through taxes, and it's not here through a private sector thing. It's from what they call the civil society, was a merging of people of influence that had a major influence in terms of the organization of the society. He had a moderating influence, a major influence in doing that, and it's here. So this is now set up. And realize it's so unique, I don't know that it should even exist. But you've got a situation where the private sector and its ability to make money And they should be able to retain all of the money they can make, a net of taxes, which are imposed upon them by the government. So you've got everything framed in the private sector, government, and that's the whole frame of all the news and everything. But you've got a civil society emerging. The people, they're called. So this responsibility is they take earnings from the cable companies through law, recognized through law, and it's always got involvement of a lot of different people. And they take earnings that they would otherwise be able to put into a feasibility study for a new channel or something and give it to a situation where they set up all the cost to have a facility where it's open to the people and the people can produce in a competitive way technologically with the people in the other two sectors, and they can do it at no cost. That is totally unique in the evolution of the communication history of the planet. It should be recognized and either eliminated as against human nature, but addressed other than some little detail about who was fighting who.
Time out. This is only Manhattan. Manhattan in New York has 5 boroughs. There is only one MNN. There will only be one MNN. This is the only one. Even though Senator Exxon could not stop this facility from being built, but he tried. Boy, did he try, okay?
They're always trying.
Okay.
No, there's not only. There's one in Portland, Oregon. There's one in Hollywood. There's one in Los Angeles. There's one in San Francisco. There's 3,000 of them across the country.
No, there aren't.
And the industry recognizes that
I asked for time. I asked for time.
Well, address the issue other
and
than
I
some
don't get it.
parochial little thing.
Okay.
Why do you
now,
stick to some parochial little thing like
Please,
Lovely
I
George?
asked for freedom of speech. Can I get it?
Well, we only got a couple minutes left. Say something meaningful in an elephant kind of sense, a comprehensive sense.
Now, there is no other facility
please.
in the United States anywhere on cable TV like MNN.
There are two.
Please.
You're wrong,
in
George.
Staten Island, in Riverdale, in Cablevision, there is nothing like
Denver,
it.
You're
Colorado.
You're wrong.
There are buildings that pretend to be public access facilities, but they're not like MNN. And they're heavily censored. Very heavily censored, okay?
Well, you're...
For example... In many franchises, there is a religious prohibition. You cannot do anything that is against this religion, that religion, or religion in general.
Well,
for example, in Dallas, this is, I quote from the franchise, "Nothing shall be allowed on Dallas cable TV that blasphemes the holy name of Jesus."
Well, that's a real... That's a non-starter. But George...
This is in most cable franchises.
All right, one of the things... It isn't in most cable franchises. They vary.
It is in most cable franchises.
But the framework, like always, is being attracted by
Every good book has been banned.
James Joyce, Ulysses, everything. Yeah,
please.
Good literature prevails.
I'm sorry, this is my program, and I'm the one who has to keep track of everything. And one of the problems we have in this universe and all other universes is there's a problem of time, and we've run out of time, gentlemen. We've been able to touch the surface. I like what you said about the elephant. I wish you'd quit looking at the trunk, at one little thing. It's a thing that's there, and we should celebrate.
Well,
everyone should celebrate it.
We need a statue of George on Union Square.
I think Times Square would be better.
Bare bosoms.
And you definitely should get a very, very big check from the Time Warner people because you really boosted the Time Warner subscribers. But we've run out of time. We can't talk anymore. We'll have to do it on another occasion. Why don't you start a program, George?
Okay.
Why don't you start a program?
Let's just talk.
We're out of time. We've got to run the credits and say goodbye to the audience. Say goodbye, everybody. Let's say goodbye.
Okay.
Goodbye.
And
M-I-C-K-Y-M-O-U-S-E.
And remember Dan Coughlin saying 750 channels, all owned by 2 corporations.
We got our eye on that.
No public access.
That's something worth having an eye on. And there's some good people there, too. And public access is a wondrous... they should just understand, those people across the country understand the the whole society should understand the utter uniqueness of public access cable television.
Well,
it's utterly unique to all the communication history of the world.
also die, and profiteers also disappear.
Right.
So the profiteers are not going to be here forever.
They're always going to be there.
And you know the dirtiest word you can say about Harold Channer? Alternative. This is a dirty word. This man is an alternative to those 2 corporations, and there's 750 channels between them. This man has alternative ideas. This man has a point of view, and that's dangerous.
That is dangerous.
You are dangerous. I want you to know that.
Thank you, George.
With
I
your
would like
world systems.
Well, I think that's what we're called for. But
your
public access
your
and
paradigm, your
and the
favorite
ability
word.